That's a good question. I haven't seen that in a really long time. Um, I think that the interesting thing with that movie by itself is that nothing really makes sense.
Welcome to River Inflow. Today we have the privilege of speaking with one of the master architects of the world of film soundscapes, Per Hallberg. He's a three-time Academy Award-winning supervising sound editor whose name is on over 75 films, including Braveheart,
Whoa.
Gladiator, Heat, Face Off, the Bourne Trilogy, and the James Bond films Skyfall and Spectre. Per's career is a living history of film sound, but it's also a story that brings us to a critical crossroads. What happens when a lifetime of human crafted art becomes data used to train an algorithm? We'll explore the craft, the technology, and the fight for human agency in a world being shaped by AI. Per Hallberg, welcome to River in Flow.
Thank you. It's nice to be in the flow.
So, Per, tell me in a couple of sentences what you've done for a living and in broad strokes as a bird's eye view, just to give our viewers a bit of context here.
Well, how do I do that short? What I do is this. Yeah, I'm a supervising sound editor, and that tells everybody nothing. But the easier way to put it is that I'm responsible for everything that you hear when you go to the movies, except the music that we get from the composer. Everything else comes from me and my team, and that's all the dialogue, all the weird stuff, all the sound design and footsteps, and all those things that we create to kind of give the illusion of you're there. And it's an odd kind of way of making a living, but it's really interesting and it's creative and it's exciting and it's never the same.
And so, what does your most recent credit of sound supervising actually mean? What's your job?
My job is like everybody in a supervising position, the less you do, the better off you are, right? So the goal is to do as little as possible, I usually say, but that's obviously not the case, but I have a number of people that works with me in a team, and it's my job to lead them with the creative intent to try to create what the director is looking for, what the movie needs, and all that kind of stuff. And everybody does their thing, but my job is to obviously put that team together, but also steer them all in a direction so that at the end we end up with a whole that makes sense.
You've been doing this for decades. Broadly speaking, how has your industry evolved over that time?
I think the biggest change really is that we used to drive VWs that wasn't always working, four cylinder puttering around, and now we're driving Ferraris. And with that, I mean, our tools have completely changed, obviously, from cutting one track at a time, trying to sit there and figure out how this is going to work with something else, and doing it on magnetic film uh, with a magnetic tape on it. And that was like a craft in itself, but the job hasn't really changed. It's the tools that have changed, that we can do more, we can do it maybe faster, but most of all, we can listen to our material together with the other stuff and see what the outcome is going to be instead of guessing and have it in your head and hoping when you get to the final mix stage that it's all going to kind of meld together and turn into something that you imagined. So I think that's the biggest difference. And with that, of course, it's cut down on the amount of people that we have on. Budgets have kind of shrunk, and that's a whole other discussion. But it's you can do more, and you can make changes later in the game. So it never stops until the last day that we're working on something. Any ideas, we can do it basically.
And do you see yourself as a sound designer, as an executive, as a filmmaker? Do you see yourself as a sound designer?
I think what you just were saying, I think I see myself as a little bit of all of those because my job is creative. It deals with sound, but at the same time, I need to manage people, I need to manage time, I need to manage budgets, and I need to manage people, both the people that work with me and the people that we work for, which is, commonly known, not always the easiest people to deal with. And, so you have to be a little bit of everything. But a lot of times I think sound designer is always usually somebody now that sits and creates sound effects. And I see it more, I'm more the sound designer for the totality of the project. I don't do one part. I have to keep all those, the things that people maybe don't think about. But, if you miss a line of dialogue, that's not good. So it has to be created around the idea that we need to get everything that the film needs to give to you, that it comes clear and precise and all that stuff.
Well, apropos that, we found a forum post from your former crew member, Chris Assells. Um, he said when
Hey,
directors
Chris.
asked, he said when directors asked who your sound designer was, you'd always reply, all my people are sound designers. Your team
Yeah,
resisted the single sound designer credit because it artificially elevated one person. Tell me about that
yeah.
philosophy.
Well, well, how do I say that? I think it came out of that sound designer became this new title, new job. And I think it originated first in the crews working up in San Francisco at Skywalker Ranch. And that was their sales pitch. You got to have a sound designer. And I always said, we've always had that. There's nothing new to it. And who it is, I think for them and what the sound designer maybe was described as was this person that would come up with these weird otherworldly sounds or come up with new things that nobody had heard before. And I always said, again, we have been doing that. We're still doing that. And like you mentioned, I didn't want to single out one person to be the one. Everybody's part. If you're working on the dialogue, if you're replacing and having actors coming in and redoing dialogue, or if you're making sure that the feet sounds right, it's all the same job. So that Chris was right when he said that. I really resisted that, and I wanted, at least when talking about it, needed to make sure that everybody felt part of the team because I tended to use all my team. We would meet every day, and everybody, didn't matter what you were doing, we were all talking about. We started watching the movie, and then we would talk about scenes, and then so that everybody knew what the idea was. Everybody had an opinion to be able to, or to have share their opinion and their taste and their ideas. And then we would come up with a plan. And at the end of the day, I will have to make the decision. This is the direction we're going. But by the time we were done, everybody went off and did their part, knowing what everybody else was doing. And I think that's tied to that. And I think that's been a big part of my way of working. And it's worked really well because I have a very solid team that works with me all the time, has worked with me for a long time. Chris Sells has started to say has retired, but he was with me probably for 20 plus years. So,
Well, speaking of that, speaking of teamwork and collaboration, looking at today's industry, shrinking budgets, tighter deadlines, remote work, the pandemic, the fires, how has all of this affected collaboration, if it has?
well, it's a tough question. I think we're trying to work, and the filmmakers are trying to work the same way we always have been and collaborating and working together. But the outcome of all these things put together is that we're working with smaller crews. So it's less people, it's less people's input that we get to a project. Um, it's uh, it's a changing. also a little bit of changing atmosphere, as in I started working in this industry and worked for a long time when the only thing that anybody was interested in was the best. There was no second rate. There was nothing like, oh, that's good enough. Unfortunately, in the industry right now, and I think on many levels, not just for us in sound, there's a new world with a lot of people making decisions that does not come from a background of filmmaking. And there is an attitude that this is good enough. And when
Mm.
you're creative and you're used to doing stuff all out all the time, that's kind of discouraging in a sense. So we still do it, but it has changed a little bit the feeling about how work gets done and what's important.
And continuing on that theme, and you and I have discussed this in other conversations. Do you think we've moved to a more of a solo designer auteur model, where it's all about one person commanding the tools?
I mean, not all the way, not down to one person. I don't think, and I don't think that's going to happen here. I'm hoping not anytime soon. You know, that is a way that many other countries this have been done with very, very few people, and they don't have enough time. So the quality is not the same. I mean, we're used to in LA, you have experts in everything. You have the best of the best in every genre, every specific task. Um, and that's hard to beat with a one-man band. And but for me, it's more of a question of the creative part, and the fun of doing it, and also the quality of the end result. If I sit down myself and I first get a movie turned over to me, I sit down and I read the script already, and because I want to get some ideas of what's on the written page before somebody shows me the picture. So a lot of times, maybe I feel they didn't capture a certain thing, and I want to know that from the script stage. What was it that they were looking for, so we can help out there. But I can sit alone and come up with a lot of ideas and make notes and come up with things that I would like to do. But then I share that with my crew, and then they're going to come with additional ideas, and we're going to go, "Huh, I didn't think about that. That's pretty good." So we're going to take it.
Yeah.
I was at this level. We're going to push it up another level with everybody's input. Then we take that and we go to a stage. And since I don't mix myself, I turn it over again and sit with a couple of new guys that is really good at doing the physical mixing and creative putting all this together. And we're collaborating. So now we push it from that other level to yet one more level. And that's the fun part. That is the great part. That's what makes it exciting. That's what makes it, you know, much better. And I venture that there's no one man band that could beat that.
So I'm leading the witness here, but with the advent of some of these new technologies, has something been lost in that shift?
I think just because of the sheer or the simple idea that it's less people involved means that you have less creative input from multiple people for the same, to try to come up with ideas how to make it better. So that's going to happen by itself. But at the same time, it's also grown on the other end because we can do things and we can listen to it and we can see this is, well, how about that now if we add something to this to push it? So the technology has given us time and possibility to just keep pushing it and keep pushing it. So that's the positive side. So it's two sides to this, and it's hard to tell which one is best. Um, but at the end of the day, I know I used to do. People asked me if I was doing an interview or if it was somebody writing in a magazine or something like that. They would always ask me, so what hardware are you using? What software are you using? And that was one of these most boring questions that you could possibly get. when you, for me, I'm not saying everybody thinks that way, but for me, it was like, why do you even ask that way? Who gives, you know, what it is? My answer to that was that my hardware was my crew, and the software was what they had in their heads. And what the machine was, it's irrelevant. And I think that's what it comes down to. Technology helps us, but as of now anyway, it hasn't, and I don't think for a long time it's going to replace that sense of taste, and dreams and whatever it is that you come up with on the creative end. That's really hard to train somebody that just deals with numbers to do.
Well, that's a good segue actually to dive into the work itself. So there's been so many movies, and it's difficult to pick, the greats. I'm sure I could pick a lot more, but there's obviously Face Off. I'm reminded of the magnetic boot sounds in the prison, or uh, in Heat, the downtown shootout scene is legendary. But one of my
Yeah,
personal favorites is the Tangier's rooftop chase in one of the Bourne films.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
there's so many interesting things there that I think you did that had never been done before. But maybe as a by way of example, there's something layered with the motorcycle sounds that doesn't sound mechanical. Uh, what did you put in there? How did you approach the scene overall? And, can you give us a little bit of insight into the way you approached it?
That's a good question. I haven't seen that in a really long time. Um, I think that the interesting thing with that movie by itself is that nothing really makes sense. Um, so when you end up it never had a real script and a real idea, and it was put together as we were going along. And pretty quickly, we all realized, there's such big holes in this story and in what is going on. How do we get from Russia to this? And you know that we all decided the only thing we can do is we got to keep going and going and going and never let the audience have a break to start figuring out that, because when you have time, you tend to sit there and go, wait a second, why did he end up in Tangier? And if you see the movie, you realize there is no clue to that. There is nothing that tells you that that's going to happen. So then what you have to do is kind of capture and move the audience, which is something that we do in general. We move the audience from one place to another, from to time and place that you recognize and feel. And I think hitting Tangier was a new environment, and we needed to set that up with sounds that would make the audience go, ah, this is a new place. This is a, completely different world, and you hear things in the background, and you set it up that way. And we kind of had the leeway of not always depending on music to drive through scenes in that movie. So we could set it up like it was almost, when they're running and chasing each other and going over the rooftops and in buildings, there would be things popping up. There would be a crying baby that you run by. There would be the, you know, call to prayer somewhere far off. And, it just was not blanket sounds. It's all specifics to make you feel the complexity of where am I? What is going on? What is he feeling and thinking? It had to feel kind of lonely, right? And that the real world there was going on at the same time as these two guys are on this quest in this chase. And it culminates when he flies through the window and in, and they actually had a hand-to-hand fight again with no music, if I remember right, which meant that Bourne in general, his character, we could really work with that so you feel it's a real human being. It hurts. And at the same time, it's two professionals fighting. It's not the action movie over the top sound or movements. It's all, you hear their breaths, you hear every little impact, and it goes very quick and it's precise, like two machines or two well-trained fighters. And that was, as a general, that scene, that place is one of those moments, and you feel like, you know what, that really worked out. It felt good.
Oh, it did. It was a great
Yeah,
scene to watch. I think everyone who's seen it remembers it as distinct and vividly, the action of that
yeah.
scene. And so you've given us a bit of a window into how you start to think about that, but can you walk us through your creative process? How do you decide what a scene should sound like? Is that when you read the script for the first time, or is it when you see the daily shoots that are coming out of the production, or when you visit the set? Give us a little bit of a sense of your creative process.
Well, it really starts. I try to read the script way in advance before I start working on it, and it I read a lot in general, but it's one of my favorite things to do because I feel like when you read, it's more interesting and it's open for your own interpretation about what does it look like, what does it smell like, because you have to create that in your head. So I read first and let that sit there for a while so that when I see it, the actual picture coming in, when I start seeing the movie, I have some ideas already that tends to stick with me all the way to the end.
Mm,
And then picture will show you, oh, this is what it is. And that's another level of now adding ideas to this. And our job, I guess, within that, it is that you always have to think about what's the emotion, what's the feeling, the importance. And it goes down to the point of details of putting a sound for something that's important for the audience to understand or see. You can have very fast cutting stuff happening on the screen, and let's say that there's a knife involved. The audience could see that scene multiple times and never see the knife because it's moving quick and it's not a big thing. But the moment I put a sound on it, everybody sees the knife. Your ear connects to your eyes, which connect to you seeing what it is that's important. So it's emotions, feelings, but it's also details and kind of slow the brain down and help you out. So it's a little bit of the audio is a little bit of a guide for the audience to be able to follow the story and what's important and to ground you a little bit. And if we do it right, this is the irony of it, I guess, that if we do our job right, the audience shouldn't notice it. And the idea is that you should just be engulfed and go with the story and not sit there and think about, oh, because if you pop out, then we made a mistake. So, and the Bourne movies were really interesting in this way because it was filmed and directed by a documentary filmmaker that shot it, cut it. The process with him was completely different. He was used with as a documentarian. What they do is that they go out and shoot footage for 2 years, and then they go home, and then they start making a story out of that material. And that's the only time I've ever seen that happen with a feature film.
hmm
So it was interesting, but also it was very quick, very busy cuts all the time. So we had to think about how can we tie these cuts together so that you as the audience know what was important in this sequence of picture. That if you just show it, and I remember the director asked me, so why are you doing that? And I said, well, it's moving and it's steady, it's shaky cams, it's happening so fast that if you watch this, you're going to get seasick. So we need to stabilize it with the audio, which is like the opposite what you normally would do. And he said, nah, I don't think so. And I said, well, why don't we try it? Why don't we play it on the big screen. I'll turn the sound off and you can watch it. And we did. And after a couple of minutes, he said to me, you know, you're right. I can't follow anything. And I'm starting to get confused. So I guess I'm going off on a tangent outside of what you were asking me about, but it's everyone is different, and it's you got to find what's important right here.
Well, we're talking about the creative process, but I'm curious how let's move into technology and talk about how that affects all of these decisions. So you started way back when in the analog world, um,
Yes.
cutting actual tape or magnetic stock. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So what were some
that
of the
is true.
challenges of that medium? Every technology has its own challenges. How did the shift to digital change your work, from that early analog world?
Well, the early analog world was, again, I think I said that before. You would have this magnetic tape, and you would have to cut it. You had to find the sound. You put it in sync, but then now you have to do a fade in and fade out so it doesn't pop. And that was actually done with a razor blade on the magnetic tape or wipe that I refused to use because it would make you drunk after a while. But you would actually scrape with a razor blade, and that's how you could take out. And you could add a little tick in there, and you could go in with a razor blade and just peel that little tick off and play it. And oh yeah, it's gone. I got it out. Or a little sandpaper. So it was it was like working in the old wood shop in a sense, right? And but then the biggest challenge was, but I think that trained me a lot, was that you had to think about what works with this because you couldn't play everything together. I would have a block that I could put up and maybe play two or three tracks on a little, you lock them up and you had picture and you could wind through it. Yeah, I can move it a little bit and you move it over a couple of curves, see that it tops each other, happens at the same time. That sounds pretty good with that. But you wouldn't know because you're going to have another 100 tracks. So there was a training ground for being creative in your head and kind of imagine. So cutting to today, I can listen to something and I can pretty much pinpoint that, what we're missing here might be a real high-end sweetener on top of that to make it pop, because that's going to work. And then we can deliver it um, while we're working. And I think that's really the biggest difference in how we're working these days. Because I can play 1,000 tracks at the same time now, and it's basically unlimited. And I could put up the music and see how does it play with the music with this, and how does the dialogue work with it. Well, pot that up, and I can hear that too. So that's it's a whole new way of working. But the people that are good at this, they still have all that stuff playing in their head, and it's a learned imagination, and the craft and all the stuff. And then on top of that, you have to know the technology now, which I suck at myself. But I have a lot of people around me that's the best of the best, so I can still make it.
So on that, I don't know how long ago that shift was exactly from analog to digital, but the guy with the razor blade, I imagine he wasn't in business anymore. Was it seen? I jest, but was it seen as a threat or an opportunity by people in your field at that time?
It was. I think we went through a period of time when all those things that you asked was actually the case. There was people that saw it as a threat to how they had been used to doing the work and how they preferred to do it. For instance, so what happened was that a lot of sound effects and sound design moved fairly quickly over to the digital medium, but dialogue work, you could be so precise that it took a long time before the computers and the computer programs that you can control it in a way that you could actually do that work better
Hmm.
on a computer compared to on magnetic tape. So I worked for a long time when I had the effects crew working on digital setups. The dialogue crew worked on the old time version of doing it. And there was also a time when I had one guy that was really good on the dialogue side on specific things, or he was still working on his old moviola and magnetic tape, and then might have somebody else that would do his work on a computer. And it was a slow transition over to this, uh, to the fully digital world.
Interesting. And now with the advent of AI, we're dealing with a rapidly uh, changing universe again. Have you experimented with any AI sound tools? I mean, noise
We
reduction,
have,
sound remover, any
yeah,
generative effects? Um,
the we are using it. We're using AI programs for things like noise reduction. We're using it for taking noise out of tracks. You can be very pinpoint these things, very, but it's not like pushing a button and then have it do it. The craft comes in again because you need to control the computer to do it so that it still feels natural, so it still is right and doesn't feel too that it just doesn't feel too cleaned up, and that the voice quality starts to be affected and all that kind of stuff. So it's it's a specialty thing to be able to do that. I don't have everybody on my crew doing that because they tend to overdo it until you really get a feel for it. Um, because it's quickly changes to mechanics and mechanical sounding and not organic anymore. Um, at the same time, we've done experiments, and I'll tell you a story, and it's not that long ago. I have a friend that's one of the best production recordists that works in this field, and he called me up and he said, could I come by and show you something, because I've been experimenting with this AI and I want to be on top of it, see what's happening here. And I just had something I wanted to show you, see what you think. I said, sure, come over to the studio. So he shows up and he puts up his laptop and he says, well, I did an interview with myself, and he's Irish, and he's not a little bit Irish, he's really Irish. And you can hear that in his accent, of course. And he did an interview with himself and he recorded himself. And then he said, but I wanted it to sound American. So I did this, and it took me about 10 minutes to change the scene. And he played it again. And now all of a sudden, this guy that I know with this broad Irish
Thick Irish
accent
accent.
is speaking American English. And I was pretty blown away because it was him. It was his voice quality. I could clearly hear that it was the same guy. They just changed it. And then he said, but I have one more for you. I wanted to see how it works with Swedish. So let's try that. So I did this one, and I wanted to ask you, that's why he came over. I wanted you to see, does it really sound Swedish to you? Because he had no idea. And again, he played it to me. And what this AI did was changing the audio and the language, keeping his voice quality, also changing the picture on the screen to make that sync to what the new language was. It's pretty
Extraordinary.
mind-boggling. And he played it, and I sat there and I listened to it, and he asked, does it sound like Swedish? And I said,
Yep.
yes, absolutely does. And I tell you, I can also tell you that your voice, you're from Stockholm, but I can also tell you what part of Stockholm your accent is from. And that's how specific it can be. So there is now tools there that are mind-boggling. But at the same time, we can't use it because a lot of the actor strikes was about trying to preserve work and their integrity and their performances, and you're not allowed to just go in and change somebody's dialogue in a movie and just do it that way. that's not clear and that's not okay. So there is now tools that exist, but we're not allowed to use them. But they're amazing. You see what they can do.
Well, so obviously you feel that AI potentially could do what you can do. Maybe not what you can do. It can do generative effects, can change a location, can change an accent. Um, but if you felt that it could do what you could do, what would your reaction be to that? Do you feel it could do
Well, but
elements of what you do?
I mean, I guess in one way it would be fine for me because it's time for me to retire pretty soon. I've done this way too long. But joking aside, I I think that it's still a long way, and I hope so, because the human mind and how we think and how our creative minds, I don't think it's going to be able to beat it. I might be wrong. I'm willing to admit that I might be wrong with that, but I don't think so. Because, if you listen inside my head sometimes, you would wonder what the heck is going on.
Well, here's
And
what
and
I'm
it, and it,
that's what I'm worried about is what interests me from a business perspective is your entire career, every creative decision, every sound you've crafted exists as digital files on studio servers, right? Somewhere.
yeah, yeah,
Um, those were work for hire contracts. They hired you as a group, as an individual, to be the sound designer on those films. So the studios own all of it. Now, those same studios could feed your life's work into AI models to create sound styles in the style of Per Hallberg without asking you or paying you. How does that sit with you?
yeah. It doesn't feel good, and if you and we have no we in contrast to music, for instance, don't have any safety net when it comes to that. uh, because music, it's owned by the composer, and they get paid royalties, and if the music is used again, they'll get the same composer will get paid one more time, and that, I guess, in a way that would be fine. But we don't have that. So it is, like you said, we're for hire. We deliver this, and at the end of the day, we kind of hand it over to the studio so they have it. But what I try to do is, when I do that part, when I hand it over to put it into the archive, I don't give them the individual sounds because we own those. What they own is the first level of mixing them together, mixed elements. You know, of course they could use that, but it's very hard to go in and something that was created by 20 tracks, you put it up and it's hard to just take that piece and put it in and make it fit because it's not going to quite work. Um, it's and that is also, it's not just computers. I'll admit something. I see movies. I saw one movie in particular that was not made here in LA, and we didn't do it, but we had done the previous films in that series. And they had hired another crew to do the next movie. And I went to see the movie, and I realized that they had watched what we had done in the previous movies, and they did the same things. What they were missing was that they saw what we did, but they didn't understand why and why we did it at a specific moment and how that affected the feeling and the action or whatever it was. So it was a little bit, well, that would be good here that they used to do. But it didn't lift the movie. It didn't add that thing that is the most important part, that you're actually creating something that's, add to the feeling and the story here.
Hmm.
So they saw what we did, but they didn't understand why. And I think it might be a little bit the same with computers. Somebody could sit and control it, I'm sure, but that's going to happen later and not quite yet.
Well, I can tell from the tone of your voice that it's not just business. This is personal. This is about who you are, work you do, about you know the full length of your career, everything you put into it. Do you think most people in your industry understand what's happening with their data? The sorts of things we've been discussing.
You know, no,
Mm,
that's a simple answer. And why is that? One could wonder, well, because that's not what they spend their day worrying about. They're busy creating new stuff. They're busy doing their part of the job. And I'm sure we can all agree that creative people, many of them, are not savvy in business. And they're not savvy in taking care of their own stuff and getting organized and setting up safeguards and all that kind of stuff. That's not how their brains work. So I think that creates a space for them that they maybe are not aware of those things because that's not how their mind works. Um, so this is all tricky times, and it is not helped in LA, for instance, now when there's a lot less work. That makes people worried, and then of course somebody's trying to come up with ways to do it cheaper and better, and all those things that you're talking about. It's happening for sure, and it's going to change the industry again. But everything that we do changes. The if you stop and think, stop, I'm not going to move along with what's happening around me in the world. That's usually a death sentence because it's going to happen. And you might as well be on the forefront of that and understand it and play with it. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind.
right. And so looking forward, when you talk to young people, for instance, joining the industry, and I believe, as we've talked about in the past over the years, sound is very much still an apprentice type business. You learn in the trade and you move up the ladder or you move to the discipline you ultimately, want to become an expert at. So what do you tell young people who want to get into sound design today, who are entering this uh, industry at this critical moment where technology is playing such a critical role? Should
Um,
should maybe to say this, should they embrace the AI tools or resist them?
hmm, no, absolutely. You have to be, if you're coming into this one. And the funny thing is, this is what I've said all these years when people ask me. It has nothing to do with technology and whatever. The tools are the easy part. So you have to learn the tools. And a monkey can learn the tools. A monkey can learn what button to push when the red light goes on, right? So you can do that, except me. I have a hard time with it, but that's a different story. But it's that is the basis. So they have to do that for sure. And then the recommendation, my next part of that recommendation is to try to be as wide as possible and start with something and try the different disciplines because you have to, like anything, you have to start doing maybe the stuff that feels repetitive and, you know, you might be cutting something and just sit there and make sure everything is in sync. And you do that for a while. And after a while, you feel sync instead of seeing it. And you got to train yourself to do it. And if you skip those parts, if you don't understand the overall feeling, I think you can easily get lost. There's many that I've seen that wants to become sound designers and they come in and they want to do all that cool stuff. And then they come and show it to me and I go, well, what were you thinking? That's not that's not working. And it's a little bit like if you think about the great painters in history, they didn't start out painting stuff. Rothko didn't start out making these simplistic, beautiful, and emotional paintings that he did late in his career. That's not how he started. No, he painted horses and tractors and people with flowers. And, you know, that's how he started. And then slowly but surely, you start simplifying. So you have to come from the ground, you have to know the tools, you have to understand the whys, and then you have to be able to build this and create something that's often simple. but powerful.
So, if you could redesign how this industry works, um, certainly the people that you've told me about in sound, the people at the Academy, people voting on pictures, people discussing, friends, have strong opinions about this. But if you could redesign how the industry works, how creative people get credited, paid, and how they retain control of their work, how would that change?
Hmm, good question. Well, when it in regards to sound, I guess I wish, and we try to do that. I wish that a lot of people that plans it out, if it's producers, if it's directors, I wish that they would all understand the power in what sound can do for their project. And because it's taken for granted at all times, it's a little bit, now we don't need to spend that much time on that. Oh, we don't need to make the budget bigger for that part. We can get away with it simpler. And it's in the big picture is peanuts in comparison, cost wise. But, there's directors that would say, like Spielberg said once, that, half of the experience when you go to the movies is sound, and
Mm,
the other half is the visual. And so why would you shortchange 50% of the experience that you get when you go to the theater? Makes perfect sense to me, and of course I agree, but not everybody has experienced it, and it's we work really hard to get, especially when we meet new directors, to kind of show them what we can do.
educate them.
Yeah. And that because that's the only way for them to be able to ask, well, this is important to me. I know now what we can do. So that would be probably my primary thing that I wish would be working better. Um, and then if we could then show the new studio department heads and everybody else what a difference it could make so they understand it so that we can get the time and the budget to be actually do the work correctly, that would be helpful. So it's a lot about that. Educate, show it, and get people excited about it, and actually come to us on the studio. We have a lot of directors and a lot of producers. That's their favorite part because they can show up at the studio and it's, the picture is cut, it's up on the screen, and now they can sit there and not worry too much about stuff and see it grow in front of them. And of course, they have a lot of notes and they're part of the team and we're working together. It's a really fun environment for a filmmaker to be in. And if you cut it back so that you take the fun out of it and the precision out of it, then it's not the same experience. And I think
Yeah.
the end result, of course, is not the same.
Well, in many ways, and to bring this full circle to some extent, that's actually why we're building River, to help people understand that the power of their data and what their contribution is. And the idea that creators should own and control their data, should own and control their input to some extent, that it doesn't get taken over by a computer, doesn't get taken for granted in a picture, in a in an online post, that it's unique, and that is very difficult to replicate, nigh impossible. Does that make sense to someone in your position?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Yes, and that's when and my feeling that's not my niche to work in, but I think the technology and the changes have happened so fast, and the excitement of being able to do something has been the thing that everybody's focused on the most. But in comparison, the safety and the security with that has not been thought about very much. And I think a lot of people have no idea what's going on. soon as you click on something, what happens? I don't think we think about it. We're just excited. Oops, look at this. And I think that's been abused.
Mm. Well, this has been fascinating, Per. It's been a real privilege for me to talk about this stuff with you in depth, and I'm sure we'll have many conversations to come. Um, but your story is a powerful reminder that behind every piece of technology, every motion picture up there on the screen, there's a human choice. And in the digital world we're all building, the choices we make about ownership, about fairness, about what we value, matter more than ever. It's about honoring, protecting, but preserving, yes, the human frequency. So thank you so much for this discussion. It's been terrific, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you over the years.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Per Hallberg.
Thank you, Mr. Weston.